The Sorrows of Young Werther is an epistolary, loosely autobiographical novel by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, first published in 1774. A revised edition appeared in 1787. It was an important novel of the Sturm and Drang period in German literature, and influenced the later Romantic movement in literature. Goethe, 24 years old at the time, finished Werther in 6 weeks of intensive writing in January to March 1774. It instantly put him among the first international literary celebrities, and remains the best known of his works to the general public. Towards the end of Goethe's life, a personal visit to Weimar became a crucial stage in any young man's grand tour of Europe. Plot summary. Most of the Sorrows of Young Werther is presented as a collection of letters written by Werther, a young artist of a sensitive and passionate temperament, to his friend Wilhelm. These give an intimate account of his stay in the fictional village of Walheim, whose peasants have enchanted him with the simple ways that he meets Charlotte, a beautiful young girl who takes care of her siblings after the death of their mother. Werther falls in love with Charlotte despite knowing beforehand that she is engaged to a man named Albert, 11 years her senior. Despite the pain it causes him, Werther spends the next few months cultivating a close friendship with them both. His pain eventually becomes so great that he is forced to leave Walheim for Weimar, where he makes the acquaintance of Fräulein von B. He suffers great embarrassment when he forgetfully visits a friend and has to face the normal weekly gathering there of the entire aristocratic set. He is not tolerated and asked to leave since he is not a nobleman. He then returns to Walheim, where he suffers still more than before, partly because Charlotte and Albert are now married. Every day becomes a torturing reminder that Charlotte will never be able to requite his love. She, out of pity for her friend and respect for her husband, decides that Werther must not visit her so frequently. He visits her one final time, and they are both overcome with emotion after he recites to her a passage of Ossian. Even before that incident, Werther had realized that one member of the love triangle, Charlotte, Albert or Werther himself, had to die to resolve the situation. Unable to hurt anyone else or seriously consider murder, Werther sees no other choice but to take his own life. After composing a farewell letter to be found after his death, he writes to Albert asking for his 2 pistols, on the pretext that he is going on a journey. Charlotte received the request with great emotion and sends the pistols. Werther then shoots himself in the head, but does not die until 12 hours later. He is buried under a linden tree that he has mentioned frequently in his letters. The funeral is not attended by any clergy, or by Albert or Charlotte. The book ends with an intimation that Charlotte may die of a broken heart. I shall say nothing of Charlotte's grief. Charlotte's life was despaired of, etc. Effect on Goethe. Werther was one of Goethe's few works governed by the Sturm und Drang movement, before he and Friedrich von Schiller moved into Weimar classicism. He initially published the novel anonymously and distanced himself from it in his later years, regretting the fame it had brought him and the consequent attention to his own youthful love of Charlotte Bach. He wrote Werther at the age of 24, and yet this was what some of his visitors in his old age knew him for. He even denounced the Romantic movement as everything that is sick. Goethe described the powerful impact the book had on him, writing that even if Werther had been a brother of his whom he had killed, he could not have been more haunted by his vengeful ghost. Yet Goethe substantially reworked the book for the 1787 edition and acknowledged the great personal and emotional impact that the Sorrows of Young Werther could exert on forlorn young lovers who discovered it. As he commented to his secretary poetry in 1821. It must be bad, if not everybody was to have a time in his life when he felt as though Werther had been written exclusively for him. Even 50 years after the book's publication, Goethe wrote in a conversation with Eckermann about the emotional turmoil he had gone through while writing the book. That was a creation which I, like the pelican, fed with the blood of my own heart. Cultural impact. The Sorrows of Young Werther turned Goethe, previously an unknown author, into a celebrated one almost overnight. Napoleon Bonaparte considered it one of the great works of European literature, having written a Goethe-inspired soliloquy in his youth and carried Werther with him on his campaigning to Egypt. It also started the phenomenon known as the Werther fever, which caused young men throughout Europe to dress in the clothing style described for Werther in the novel. Items of merchandising such as prints, decorated Meissen porcelain and even a perfume were produced. The book reputedly also led to some of the first known examples of copycat suicide. This aspect of Werther fever was watched with concern by the authorities. Both the novel and the Werther clothing style were banned in Leipzig in 1775. The novel was also banned in Denmark and Italy. It was also watched with fascination by fellow authors, one of whom, Friedrich Nicolai, decided to create a satirical piece with a happy ending, entitled Die Freuden des jungen Werthers, in which Albert, having realized what Werther is up to, loaded chicken's blood into the pistol, thereby foiling Werther's suicide, and happily concedes lot to him. After some initial difficulties, Werther sheds his passionate youthful side and reintegrates himself into society as a respectable citizen. Goethe, however, was not pleased with the Freuden and started a literary war with Nicolai that lasted all his life, writing a poem titled Nicolai auf Werther's Grave, in which Nicolai defecates on Werther's grave, so desecrating the memory of a Werther from which Goethe had distanced himself in the meantime, as he had from the Sturm und Drang. This argument was continued in his collection of short and critical poems, The Xenian, and his play Faust. Alternative versions and appearances. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Frankenstein's monster finds the book in a leather portmanteau, along with two others, Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Greeks and Romans, and Milton's Paradise Lost. He sees Werther's case as similar to his own, of one rejected by those he loved. The book influenced Hugo Foscolo's The Last Letters of Jacopo Ortis, which tells of a young man who commits suicide out of desperation caused not only by love, but by the political situation of Italy before the unification. This is taken to be the first Italian epistolary novel. Thomas Carlyle, who incidentally translated Goethe's novel Wilhelm Meister into English, frequently refers to and parodies Werther's relationship in his 1836 novels Arteries Ortis. The statistician Karl Pearson's first book was The New Werther. Goethe's work was the basis for the 1892 opera Werther by Jules Massenet. William Makepeace Thackeray wrote a poem satirizing Goethe's story entitled Sorrows of Werther. Thomas Mann's 1939 novel Lot in Weimar recounts a fictional reunion between Goethe and his youthful passion, Charlotte Bach. An episode in the TV series History Bites features the book, with Bob Bainborough as Goethe. Ulrich Plenzdorf, a GDR poet, wrote a satirical novel called Die Neuen Leiden des Jungen W, transposing the events into an East German setting, with the protagonist as an ineffectual teenager rebelling against the system. In William Hill Brown's The Power of Sympathy, the novel appears next to Harrington's unsealed suicide note. The 2010 German film Goethe is a fictional account of the relations between the young Goethe, Charlotte Bach, and her fiancé Kästner, which at times draws on that of Werther, Charlotte and Albert. The 2014 novel The Sorrows of Young Might by John Zelazny is a loosely autobiographical parody of Goethe's novel. Translations. The Sorrows of Young Werther, Dover Thrift Editions, Tr. Thomas Carlyle, R. Dillon Boylan, Dover Publications, 2002, ISBN 0-486-42455-3, originally published by C.T. Brainard. The Sufferings of Young Werther, Tr. Harry Steinhauer, New York, W. W. Norton and Amp Co., 1970, ISBN 0-393-09880-X. The Sorrows of Young Werther and Amp Novell Classics Edition, Tr. Elizabeth Mayer, Louise Bogan, Poems Transl, and Amp Forward W. H. Auden. Vintage Books, June 1990, ISBN 0-679-729-518, originally published by Random House. The Sorrows of Young Werther Classics Library Complete Collection, Tr. Michael Hulse, Penguin Books, 1989, ISBN 0-14044503-X. The Sorrows of Young Werther Modern Library, Tr. Burton Pike, Random House, 2004, ISBN 0812969901. The Hebrew translation was popular among youths in the Zionist pioneer communities in British Mandate of Palestine in the 1930s and 1940s and blamed for the suicide of several young men considered to have emulated Werther.